I'm not sure when it started. The slow, subtle shift in everything I thought I knew about her, about us. But I know it was around the time she stopped looking at me the same way. I didn't notice it at first. How could I? We were busy, life was busy. It was just the usual grind. But then, it was as if the hum of our daily life was gone. The small talks over breakfast, the laughter, the easy moments when she'd ask how my day went. It all started to fade. I didn't think much of it. People get tired, stressed. But I should have noticed. Her phone became her constant companion. It wasn't that she was on it all the time, but there was something different about it. She'd guard it more. It was subtle, just a change in the way she held it, or the way she'd quickly hide it when I walked into the room. At first, I dismissed it. She was probably just busy with work or friends. But then the late nights began. She'd stay at work later than usual, or go out with friends more often. The excuses were always the same. Just catching up with everyone, she'd say. But it wasn't like it used to be. Before, she'd share those moments with me, the little details of the people she saw and the things they talked about. Now, she was distant. She'd come home, barely greet me, and go straight to the shower. She'd be more closed off than ever. I didn't want to believe it, but something didn't sit right. What was really going on? I couldn't shake the thought that maybe there was someone else. I told myself it was just paranoia, just a result of the funk we were both in. But then, one night, she came home later than usual. She didn't even kiss me. I tried to brush it off, but that gut feeling kept gnawing at me. I didn't want to confront her. I wasn't even sure if I was being irrational. But the signs were there, all around me. The phone, the late nights, the distance. I couldn't ignore them anymore. So, I began to look. Quietly, discreetly. I didn't want to believe it, but I needed the truth. I had to know if she was seeing someone else, if the woman I thought I knew was really the one I had married. And as I looked deeper, I realized something far more unsettling. This wasn't just about her. This was about me too. About who I had become and the man I was becoming in the face of everything falling apart. I wasn't sure what I'd find or how deep this would go, but I knew this. I needed to get to the bottom of it. No more pretending everything was okay. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but it wasn't just about the late nights or the guarded phone. It was the coldness. The way she would look at me, like I was a stranger, like I wasn't the person she used to confide in. I kept telling myself I was overthinking, that it was just a phase, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't until a Thursday evening, a week after I started feeling this unease, that I decided to do something about it. I'd been pushing the idea of snooping out of my mind for so long, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers. I began with the most obvious thing, her phone. I knew it wasn't a great idea. Hell, it felt like an invasion of trust, but the suspicion was suffocating me. She'd always been so open with it before. She'd never hidden anything. So why was she acting like this now? What was she so afraid I'd see? I didn't know what I was looking for, but I went through her messages, her social media. I wasn't even sure I'd find anything. But the more I scrolled, the more unsettled I became. There were the usual updates from friends, but there was a pattern. One name kept appearing, popping up in her messages more than anyone else's, Dan. He was a coworker, someone she'd mentioned a few times before, but never in a way that made me think much of it. But now, seeing his name over and over, I couldn't help but feel the weight of that gut instinct kicking in. I didn't find anything too obvious at first, just friendly banter, work-related chats. But then, something shifted. I saw a message that made my blood run cold. It was from him, asking her about a dinner they had just the two of them last weekend. I felt my heart skip a beat. Just the two of them? She hadn't mentioned dinner plans with him. That was odd, but I still told myself I was jumping to conclusions. But I couldn't stop there. I had to know more. So, I set a plan. I'd be home early the next day, acting casual, and I'd look through her phone again when she wasn't around. This time, I found something. A picture of her and Dan, taken just the weekend before, laughing together, way too close for just friends. I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. There it was, staring me in the face. A moment I couldn't deny, even though I didn't have the full picture yet. They were together. And if I wasn't wrong, this wasn't just a casual friendship. She was seeing him. I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. How long had this been going on? How long had she been lying to me? I wanted to confront her, to throw the phone at her and demand the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. I couldn't act rashly. I needed to think. I needed to gather my thoughts, to plan my next steps. This wasn't something I could undo. But the questions flooded my mind. Was I blind all this time? Had she been cheating on me for months? Or was this something recent? And what would I do if I was right? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. I spent the next few days in a haze, my mind constantly drifting back to that photo of her with Dan. I couldn't shake it, couldn't stop replaying the scene over and over in my head. I kept telling myself it wasn't enough, that I was jumping to conclusions, but deep down, I knew. I knew there was something more happening behind my back. I'd never been a confrontational person. I was the type to sit back and analyze, to think before acting. But this was different. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a minor argument. This was betrayal, and it cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet, not without knowing more. I didn't want to give her any reason to play innocent, to twist things around. I had to wait. But the waiting was killing me. The silence between us grew thicker, like a fog settling in the space where we used to be. I could feel her avoiding me, just like I was avoiding her. We both knew something had changed, but neither of us was brave enough to address it directly. I started to change too. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. I became distant, cold even, which only seemed to make things worse. She started asking more questions, getting curious about my behavior, about why I was so withdrawn. "You've been so distant lately," she said one evening after dinner, her voice quieter than usual. "What's going on with you?" I could feel my jaw tighten, my chest constrict. She was looking at me, really looking at me, trying to read me, to figure out what was going on in my head. The truth was, I was struggling to keep my cool. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell her that I knew what she'd been doing. But another part of me held back. I needed to be smart about this. I had to keep my emotions in check, at least for now. "I'm just tired," I said, my voice flat, too rehearsed. "It's been a long week." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, but she didn't press. She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push it either. That was the problem. There was no confrontation, no real discussion. It was like we were both trapped in this unspoken game, trying to avoid acknowledging the truth. The next day, I woke up early, unable to sleep through the gnawing feeling in my chest. I had to do something. I had to know. I couldn't keep pretending. So, I decided to follow her. I told myself it wasn't about spying or invading her privacy. It was about getting the answers I needed. It wasn't healthy to live in this kind of uncertainty, in this limbo of suspicion. If she was seeing him, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I followed her out the door that afternoon, making sure to keep a safe distance, watching her as she got into her car and drove off. I didn't know where she was going, but I had a sinking feeling I'd find out soon enough. And just like that, I was caught in the waiting game again, waiting for the storm to hit. I followed her for what felt like hours, my heart racing with every turn she made. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I knew I had to know. The doubts had been eating at me for weeks, and now I was driving myself crazy trying to uncover the truth. She took a few random turns, and I kept my distance, trying to stay unnoticed. Finally, she pulled into a small, inconspicuous parking lot behind a modest restaurant. My gut twisted. I didn't know why, but I had a feeling I'd find something here. And then I saw him. Dan. He was standing by the entrance, glancing at his phone, and it hit me like a punch to the stomach. There was no mistaking him. I had seen enough of their messages, enough of his name popping up on her phone to recognize him immediately. I sat there, frozen in my car, as they met at the door and exchanged a few words. I could see her smiling, and that smile wasn't for me. I watched as they walked inside together, close, too close. She didn't even look around, didn't seem to care who might be watching. I wanted to get out of the car, to march inside, confront them both, but I couldn't. Instead, I just sat there, in the dark, watching through the tinted windows, as they shared something that wasn't meant for me. The touch of her hand on his arm. The way she laughed at something he said. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I had always thought I was imagining things, her distance, her late nights, the guarded phone. But now, there was no denying it. This was real. She was with him. I stayed there for hours, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Finally, they left, walking out of the restaurant together, her arms slipping into his. They kissed outside, and it felt like the last straw. I watched them, helpless, as they said their goodbyes, and then drove off without a second thought. I waited until they were gone before I started my car. My hands were shaking, and my mind was numb. What had I just seen? How had I not known? I wanted to confront her, to scream, but I didn't. I couldn't yet. I drove back home, each mile heavier than the last. When I arrived, she was already there, acting like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I stood in the doorway, my breath shallow, and I knew I had to face her. But I didn't know if I was ready to hear what she had to say. The truth was undeniable, and now, so was the fallout. I stood in the doorway, unable to move for a few moments. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest I could barely hear anything else. The truth was undeniable now, but I didn't know how to confront her. I had seen everything. I knew what had been happening behind my back, but I couldn't figure out how to speak the words aloud. She looked up from her phone when I walked in, acting as if nothing was wrong. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked casually. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both playing some strange game, pretending, avoiding, dancing around the truth. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I stood there frozen, the weight of what I knew settling on me. "You okay?" she asked again, her voice filled with an edge of concern. "You seem a little off." "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat, even though I was anything but. "Just thinking." She gave me a questioning look, but didn't press. Instead, she returned to her phone, seemingly unaware that I was falling apart inside. I knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I had to say something. I couldn't let this drag on any longer. "Where were you today?" I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by my question. "Just out running errands," she said, her voice light, as though it was no big deal. "You know, same old stuff." I didn't believe her. Not for a second. I had followed her. I had seen where she went. "You met Dan, didn't you?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I could see the mask crack. She hesitated before she spoke. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but it was too late. I had already seen enough. "Don't lie to me," I said, the anger creeping in despite myself. "I saw you two together. Don't pretend this is nothing." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. She couldn't deny it anymore. I had seen it with my own eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. "It just happened." I wanted to shout, to demand more answers, but all I could do was stare at her. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was standing before me, and the trust was gone. The reality of everything we had built was crumbling, and all I had left were the broken pieces. I looked at her, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long?" "I don't know," she replied, barely able to meet my gaze. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't enough. I didn't know if it would ever be enough. I turned away, the weight of everything too much to bear. What now? What was left of us? The silence in the room was suffocating. I could feel her eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. The anger, the pain, it was all there, swirling inside me, but I didn't know where to direct it. How do you process the realization that the person you trusted more than anyone else has broken that trust so completely? I stood there, my back to her, staring at the floor, trying to steady myself. I could hear her soft breathing, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Please. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Sorry. The word hung in the air, heavy and meaningless. How could she be sorry now? After everything? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. "You didn't just hurt me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You broke me." I could feel the tears building in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. Not in front of her. I was too angry, too devastated to allow myself to show that weakness. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the years of trust we had built, now shattered in an instant. "I don't know how to look at you anymore," I continued, my voice shaky, the words almost foreign to me. "I don't know who you are. I thought I knew you, but I don't." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. Apologize more, beg for my forgiveness, but she didn't. She just stood there, like she was waiting for me to tell her what came next. Like she was waiting for me to fix this. But I couldn't. I couldn't fix this. "I don't even know what to do with all this," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "How do I move forward from here? How do I even want to?" Her voice broke the silence again, softer this time. I can't change what happened, but I want to fix this. I love you. I always have. Her words felt like a slap. She loved me? Was that what this was about? Her guilt? Her fear of losing me? That was the only reason she was standing there, begging for forgiveness, wasn't it? She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for the consequences. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I even want to. And with those words, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, her hands trembling at her sides. The house felt emptier than it ever had before, as if the space itself had already started to crumble. I couldn't look back. I wouldn't. Not now. I had no idea where we went from here, but one thing was clear: everything had changed, and I wasn't sure if there was any going back. The days that followed were a blur, a haze of numbness and anger that seemed to hang over every corner of the house. I tried to focus on work, on keeping my mind occupied, but every time I walked through the door, the silence hit me like a wave. The home that had once been a place of comfort and familiarity now felt foreign, cold, empty. She was still there, of course, but we were strangers to each other. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was always strained, as if we were both tiptoeing around the fallout of everything that had been said and unsaid. The awkwardness was suffocating. She tried to apologize, tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to engage. I couldn't hear her words anymore. All I could hear was the echo of her betrayal. At night, I'd lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had gotten here. How had we gone from the couple who could talk about anything, who had shared everything, to this, two people barely able to look at each other without feeling the weight of what had happened? I couldn't escape the thought of her and him, of them, laughing, touching, sharing something that was never meant for me. It was like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, and no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, it was always there, lurking in the background. She would occasionally come to me, her eyes filled with guilt and regret. "Please, can we talk?" she'd ask, her voice fragile, desperate. But I wasn't ready. How could I be? "I don't want to talk," I'd say, my voice flat, not angry, just empty. I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when it was anything but. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix what had been broken. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us grew wider. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything that had led up to it. The lack of communication, the growing distance, the way we had both stopped seeing each other. The affair was just the final crack in a foundation that had already been crumbling. I found myself questioning everything. Was this it? Was this the end? I had always believed that no matter what happened, we could work through it. But now I wasn't so sure. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to work through it. And then came the day when I finally had to face the question that had been hanging over us both. What now? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know where to go from here. The truth was, I didn't know if we could ever go back to what we had before. But something had to change. It had to. I just wasn't sure if I was ready to change it. I woke up that morning with a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't a feeling I had been used to lately. Most days, I felt lost in the haze of anger, betrayal, and confusion. But today it was different. There was a quiet certainty inside me, a voice that told me it was time to make a choice. I had been avoiding it, dancing around the truth, letting the days pass by without addressing what we were, what we had become. But it had gone on long enough. I couldn't keep existing like this, stuck in limbo, unable to move forward, unable to move on. She was still in the house, but it felt like we were living in two different worlds. The tension was unbearable, but neither of us knew how to bridge the gap. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that we weren't going to fix this. Not now, not like this. There had been too much damage. Too much had been broken. I couldn't deny the anger I still felt. It was there, bubbling just beneath the surface, waiting for the slightest spark to ignite it. But that wasn't all I felt. There was sadness too, a deep, aching sadness. I had given her everything. My trust. My heart. And she had thrown it all away, like it meant nothing. I walked into the living room, where she was sitting, her eyes on the floor. She looked up when I entered, her face a mix of hope and fear. She opened her mouth to say something, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice quiet but firm. "About everything. About us." She nodded slowly, like she was afraid to say anything that might make things worse. I could see her trembling, and I knew she was waiting for me to decide her fate, our fate. I don't think I can do this anymore, I said, my chest tightening as I spoke. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but they were the truth. I had to face it. Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might break down, but she didn't. Instead, she just looked at me, the guilt in her eyes clearer than ever. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand again. You've broken my trust. And no matter how much you say you're sorry, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I continued, my voice shaking now. I don't know if I can look at you the same way. Tears welled up in her eyes, and I saw her lips quiver as she struggled to find the words. Please, don't say that. We can work through this. We can fix it. I love you. Her words stabbed at me, but I had to stay strong. I had to be honest with myself. I don't know if love is enough anymore, I said, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you've done. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought the world had stopped spinning. I had said it. I had made the decision. She stood up slowly, her face a mask of pain, but there was nothing more to say. The silence between us was deafening. And just like that, I realized that no matter how much I had once loved her, sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken. I turned away, not knowing what the next step was, but feeling certain that this was the beginning of something I couldn't undo. It was over. The house felt emptier after the decision. It was as if all the warmth, all the familiarity, had been drained from the walls. I had expected a flood of emotions to follow my words, but the aftermath was just quiet. A strange, suffocating silence that hung between us like a thick fog. She didn't fight me. She didn't beg, not in the way I thought she would. Instead, she just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with the weight of what had just been said. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't bear to see the person she had become, the person I didn't know, the person who had betrayed everything I held dear. The next few days were a blur. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was minimal. There were no more apologies, no more promises to fix things. There was nothing left to fix. The damage had been done, and I had made my choice. I moved into the guest room, and the once shared space felt like a foreign land now. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was the emotional chasm between us. Every night, I lay in that empty bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt the weight of the loneliness pressing down on me. I missed the version of us that had been, before the lies, before the secrets. But that version was gone, replaced by the shattered remnants of something that no longer existed. I couldn't tell if she was trying to respect my space or if she was too broken to do anything at all. Every time I passed her in the hallway, she would avert her eyes, like she was afraid to make any more mistakes. And I was too angry, too hurt, to offer any comfort. A week passed like this, and the house was slowly suffocating us both. The tension was still there, but now it was joined by a sense of finality. We had both been waiting for something to change, but neither of us had the courage to take the first step. She hadn't left, but I knew it was only a matter of time. I had made my decision. There was no going back. I could feel the weight of her absence already, even though she was still here. It was the absence of trust, of affection, of everything that had once made this place home. In its place was a dull ache that seemed to spread through every inch of the house. One evening, I found myself sitting on the couch, my thoughts spiraling. I should have been relieved to finally have clarity, but all I could think about was the future. What would life be like without her? Could I ever truly forgive her? Or had I already made my peace with the fact that we were done? I didn't know. I didn't have the answers. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of something like peace. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't closure. But it was a kind of quiet, like the calm after a storm. The storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, there was nothing left to do except wait for it to pass. The days blurred together after that. I don't know if it was the shock or just the sheer emotional exhaustion, but the house became a place I could barely stand to be. Every time I passed her in the hallway, I felt a pang of something. Resentment, loss, confusion, but mostly, I felt the deep, hollow ache of knowing we were never going to be the same. She kept to herself, retreating further into silence, and I did the same. It was like we had agreed, without saying a word, that our relationship had been reduced to an awkward truce. I'd hoped that time would bring clarity, that I'd wake up one morning and just know what to do. But that day never came. Instead, I just kept waking up to the same haunting emptiness, the same broken routine. One evening, about 2 weeks after everything fell apart, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, her face pale, her eyes red. She hadn't been crying. She was just empty. "I think it's time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think it's time I leave." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The reality of it hit me harder than I expected. I had been expecting this moment, but now that it was here, I couldn't decide if I felt relief or devastation. I nodded, my throat tight. "I think that's probably for the best." There was a long pause as we both sat in the quiet of the living room. She didn't move, didn't get up, didn't pack her things. I didn't know what to say. This was it, wasn't it? This was the end. And yet, the silence between us felt like a strange kind of pause, a moment between the storm and the aftermath. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke again. "I'm sorry. I wish I could take it all back. I've never stopped loving you." Her words, meant to be comforting, only made things worse. I wasn't sure if she was saying them to appease her guilt or if she actually believed them. Either way, it didn't matter. Love wasn't enough anymore. "I know," I said quietly, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. "But that doesn't change what's been done." She nodded, her hands shaking as she folded them in her lap. "I understand." It wasn't a dramatic exit. There were no angry words or tearful goodbyes. She just got up and quietly walked to the bedroom to pack her things. I stayed on the couch, unable to move, unsure of how I felt. She was leaving, but I wasn't sure if I was relieved or numb or something in between. The house felt even emptier when she was gone. But strangely, there was a small part of me that felt a shift, a quiet sigh of relief. I had been waiting for her to make the decision, and now that she had, I didn't feel as lost as I thought I would. I spent the rest of the evening staring at the walls, feeling the weight of my decision settle in. This was it. There was no going back. But in the emptiness, something else lingered. It wasn't just the loss of her, it was the loss of myself. I didn't know who I was anymore, or who I would become without her. The first night alone in the house felt surreal. I had expected to feel something, relief, peace, maybe even some closure, but all I felt was emptiness. The silence was deafening. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence you get when you're alone with your thoughts. This was the kind of silence that pressed down on you, like a heavy weight that you couldn't shake off. I sat in the living room long after the sun went down, staring at the darkened windows. I'd never realized how loud the silence could be until now. There was no soft chatter, no occasional clinking of dishes from the kitchen, no shared moments. It was just me and the echo of a life that had once been full of noise and life, now turned hollow. It was hard to ignore the things she had left behind. Her perfume on the pillow, the books she'd left open on the coffee table, the empty space in the closet. It was as if she'd left traces of herself everywhere, and yet, nothing felt real anymore. I couldn't believe she was really gone. I spent hours that night pacing through the house, my thoughts in a spiral. I thought about the good times, the trips, the laughter, the little inside jokes, and I found myself mourning the person I thought she was. I wondered where that woman had gone. Was she always hiding in the shadows? Or had I just missed the signs? I thought about the future. What now? Where did I go from here? I had spent so much time focused on the wreckage of our marriage that I hadn't stopped to think about what it meant for me. What would my life look like without her in it? There was a part of me that still wanted answers, still wanted to understand why it all happened. But another part of me realized that answers wouldn't change anything. It didn't matter why she'd done it. It didn't matter how much I wanted to know the truth. The damage was already done. I couldn't rewind time. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. By the time I made my way to bed, the exhaustion from the past few weeks had finally caught up with me. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind still racing. I didn't feel the usual comfort of sleep pulling me in. Instead, it was like I was suspended in some in-between space, unable to move forward, unable to go back. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been spent waiting for things to change, waiting for her to come back, for the love to feel the same, for everything to fall back into place. But it never would. And now, it was just me, alone, facing the emptiness that was left in the wake of everything. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I realized I had to figure it out on my own. In the quiet of that night, with nothing but my own thoughts for company, I understood one thing. I couldn't stay stuck in the past. It was time to rebuild. It was time to move on. But I wasn't sure where to start. The days after she left felt like a slow, heavy march through fog. I moved through the motions, running errands, eating, sleeping, but it was all mechanical. I couldn't bring myself to feel anything more than the quiet ache that lingered in my chest. But something shifted one evening when I sat at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee mug. It was the same one she always used, the one she'd picked out years ago at that little shop. Instead of pushing it away, I picked it up, walked to the sink, and washed it. It wasn't much, but in that simple act, I felt like I was reclaiming something, some small bit of control over the mess my life had become. I didn't throw it out. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just washed it, quietly, as though I was preparing to let go without destroying what was left. The next day, I began clearing out some of her things. It wasn't easy. Every item I touched seemed to carry a memory, both painful and sweet. But I knew it had to be done. I couldn't live in the shadow of what we had anymore. Slowly, I packed her clothes, folded them, and made space in the house for myself. It wasn't just about cleaning out a closet. It was about clearing out the remnants of a life that was no longer mine. Each small task felt like a step towards something new. I didn't know where I was headed yet, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving forward. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and maybe I never would be, but I was learning that I could rebuild. This wasn't about forgetting her. It was about finding myself again. It was the first step, and it felt like it mattered. The weeks after she left passed in a blur of empty days and restless nights. I kept busy, mostly with work, just trying to fill the silence. I avoided the spaces in the house that reminded me of her, the little corners where we'd shared moments, the books we'd picked out together, the kitchen where we'd laughed over burnt dinners. But slowly, something inside me started to change. The heaviness didn't lift, but it began to feel less suffocating. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, my mind finally quiet for the first time in ages, I realized something. I was still here. I was still alive, still breathing, still moving. The world hadn't ended, despite the fact it felt like it had. The pain wasn't gone, but it wasn't the only thing defining me anymore. I started to take small steps. I began seeing friends again, people I hadn't talked to in months. I didn't talk about her. I didn't need to. I just needed to be around people who reminded me that I was more than the sum of my heartbreak. I also started walking. Not to escape, but to reconnect. I'd walk through the neighborhood in the evenings, alone, letting my mind wander. It was on one of these walks that I finally allowed myself to remember the things I'd loved about myself before everything fell apart. I liked being outside. I liked feeling the breeze. I liked the quiet peace of being alone, but not lonely. It wasn't a grand epiphany. It wasn't a rush of joy, but it was something. It was the first step toward finding myself again, toward realizing that I didn't need her to be whole. And for the first time since she left, I felt a flicker of hope that life could go on. Without her, but with me. It's strange, but after some time, the house began to feel a little more like mine again. The emptiness was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating. It was like the space had shifted from a place of loss to a place where I could breathe, slowly, cautiously, but at least I was breathing. I started getting into a new routine. Little things. Nothing big or life-changing. Just actions that helped me regain some sense of control. I began cooking dinner again, something I hadn't done in months. It wasn't the elaborate meals she used to encourage us to make together. It was just me, cooking whatever I could throw together, but it felt like I was taking care of myself for the first time in ages. Even the walks I had started taking became something I looked forward to. They weren't just a way to escape. They were a way to clear my mind. I would head out at dusk, letting the cool evening air settle around me. Sometimes I'd bring music, other times I'd just let the silence take over. Each step felt like a small act of reclaiming my space, my life, without needing someone else's approval or presence. I also took time to work on things I had neglected during our marriage, projects around the house, things I'd been too distracted to finish. Slowly, the house became less of a symbol of everything that had gone wrong and more of a place where I could find peace, even in the quiet. I wasn't rushing things, though. I didn't need to. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. For the first time in a long while, I was doing things for myself. And that felt like progress. The pain was still there, lingering under the surface, but I realized I didn't have to let it dictate my every move anymore. Slowly but surely, I was starting to heal. And maybe, just maybe, I could be whole again. On my own. A few months had passed since she left, and I had settled into a rhythm. The silence no longer felt like an unbearable weight, but more like an opportunity, an empty canvas that I was slowly filling with my own color again. It wasn't easy, but I was learning to find moments of peace, to remember that I could stand on my own 2 feet. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a book in my hands, I realized how much had shifted. I wasn't just getting by anymore. I was starting to enjoy life again, even in small ways. It wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about finding joy in the things that were still mine, in the spaces that I hadn't even known I needed. It was during this time that I reconnected with some old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. We didn't talk about the divorce or what had happened. There was no need to. We just caught up, laughed, and remembered how much fun we used to have. And it hit me. I was no longer defined by the pain of what had happened. I was more than the sum of my past mistakes, heartbreaks, and betrayals. That night, after I'd said goodbye to my friends, I took another walk. It had become a sort of ritual for me. Walking through the neighborhood, feeling the cool air on my face, thinking about where I had been and where I was going. For the first time in a long while, I thought about the future without a sense of dread. I didn't know exactly what it held, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could embrace it. I wasn't broken anymore. I was rebuilding. And that, I realized, was the real turning point. It wasn't about healing quickly or forgetting what happened. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. It was about standing on my own, accepting my own strength, and realizing that I could move forward without her and with myself. And that was enough for now.